Jack stood at the gate of the Montana foster home, his little sister Emily's hand clasped tightly in his. The social worker's car crunched away on the gravel drive, leaving them alone with their battered suitcases and the weight of their 8 and 6 years. The house loomed large, its windows like blinking eyes. Jack squeezed Emily's hand. "It'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. That night, as Emily's quiet sniffles filled their shared room, Jack drifted into a familiar dream. He was in a cabin, surrounded by canvases splashed with vibrant colors. The scent of pine and turpentine mingled in the air. A faceless woman stood at an easel, her brush dancing across the canvas. A man's deep laugh echoed from another room. Jack woke with a start, the dream fading like mist in sunlight. He fumbled under his bed, fingers searching until they closed around the smooth leather of an old sketchbook. He'd always had it, though he couldn't remember where it came from. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, Jack flipped through the pages. Rough sketches of landscapes, faces, and abstract swirls filled the yellowed paper. Something about them tugged at his memory, like a half-forgotten song. As the days blurred into weeks, Jack found himself returning to the sketchbook more often. Sometimes, when the other kids' taunts became too much, or when Emily's homesick tears threatened to break his heart, he'd lose himself in those mysterious drawings. They whispered of a different life, a place where he and Emily belonged. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Jack would close his eyes and will himself back to that cabin of colors and laughter, hoping that this time he might see the faces of the people who filled it with such warmth. The day Jack first picked up a pencil to draw was unremarkable in every other way. It was a Tuesday, raining, and the foster home buzzed with the usual chaos of too many children and too little space. Jack sat at the kitchen table, absently swirling his spoon in a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal. His eyes kept drifting to the calendar on the wall, its picture a sun-drenched field of wildflowers. Without really thinking about it, he reached for a discarded homework sheet and began to sketch. The lines flowed from his pencil as if they had a will of their own. Jack lost track of time, the noise of the house fading away until all he could hear was the soft scratch of graphite on paper. "Jack, you're going to be late for school." His foster mother's voice shattered his concentration. She bustled into the kitchen, took one look at his drawing, and sighed. "Doodling again? You should focus on your studies instead of wasting time like this." Jack's cheeks burned as he crumpled the paper and stuffed it in his pocket. But he couldn't shake the feeling that had come over him while drawing, a sense of rightness, like finding a perfect puzzle piece. At school, during art class, Mrs. Thompson set them to drawing still lifes. Jack hesitated, then slowly began to recreate the vase of wilting daisies on his desk. As he worked, he felt that same focus descend, the world narrowing to just his pencil and the paper. "Jack?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was soft beside him. He looked up, blinking as if waking from a dream. The teacher was staring at his drawing, her eyes wide. "This is remarkable. Have you had lessons?" Jack shook his head, suddenly aware of the other students craning their necks to see. Mrs. Thompson smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "Well, it seems you have a natural talent. We'll have to see about nurturing that, won't we?" For the first time since arriving at the foster home, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he had found something that was truly his own. The hallway echoed with jeers and the dull thud of bodies against lockers. Jack quickened his pace, rounding the corner to find Emily cornered by 3 older boys, her small frame trembling. "Hey!" Jack's voice cracked, but he stepped forward, fists clenched. "Leave her alone." The largest boy turned, sneering. "Or what, orphan boy?" Jack's heart hammered, but he stood his ground. "Or I'll make you." What followed was a blur of fists and pain, ending with Jack in the principal's office, a split lip and the bitter taste of injustice in his mouth. That night, as Emily tended to his bruises with gentle, worried hands, Jack realized how precarious their situation was. They'd been passed over for adoption 3 times now, always together because Jack refused to be separated from his sister. "We'll find a real home someday," he promised Emily, trying to believe it himself. In the quiet hours after Emily fell asleep, Jack would pull out his sketchbook. Page after page, filled with drawings, memories of their parents, snapshots of their life in the foster system, and increasingly, dreams of a future where they were safe and loved. One afternoon, Jack noticed Emily studying his drawings with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. "What is it?" he asked. Emily pointed to a sketch of their old house. The curtains in the kitchen were yellow with little flowers, not stripes, she said matter-of-factly. Jack blinked, surprised. He'd drawn that from memory months ago. "How do you remember that?" Emily shrugged. "I just do. I remember everything I see." It was the first hint of Emily's extraordinary gift, a flicker of something special in a life that had given them so little to celebrate. As the rejections piled up and hope dwindled, Jack found solace in his art. Each drawing was a silent rebellion against a system that seemed determined to overlook them, a declaration that he and Emily existed, that they mattered. And in those sketches, in the quiet determination to keep Emily safe, in the stubborn refusal to let go of each other, the siblings forged a bond stronger than any family could have given them. The diagnosis came on a crisp autumn morning, the words falling like heavy stones in the sterile doctor's office. Rare kidney condition, expensive treatment, poor prognosis without intervention. Jack watched the color drain from their foster parents' faces, saw the gears turning as they calculated costs against the meager stipend they received. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that Emily's fate hung in the balance of cold financial equations. That night, as Emily slept fitfully in her hospital bed, Jack pulled out his sketchbook. His pencil flew across the page, pouring his fear and determination into every line. By morning, a plan had formed. The local fair was coming up. Jack had seen artists selling their work there before. Why couldn't he do the same? For weeks, Jack drew like a man possessed. Every free moment was spent hunched over his sketchbook, ignoring aching hands and bleary eyes. Emily watched from her bed, worry creasing her young face. "You should rest, Jack," she'd say, her voice thin and reedy. But Jack would just smile, showing her his latest creation. "Soon," he'd promise, "after we get you better." The day of the fair dawned bright and clear. Jack set up his modest booth, heart pounding as he arranged his drawings. People passed by, some pausing to look, others moving on quickly. Hours crawled by. Jack sold a few small sketches, but nowhere near enough. Despair began to creep in as the sun dipped low. Then, just as he was about to pack up, a woman stopped at his booth. Her eyes widened as she took in his drawings, lingering on a sketch of two children, a boy and a girl, standing before a cabin filled with art. "These are extraordinary," she breathed. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" Jack swallowed hard. "I just always could. Please, would you like to buy one? My sister, she needs." The woman held up a hand, her eyes softening. "Tell me about your sister," she said gently. And as the fair bustled around them, Jack began to speak, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Miss Hartley's eyes never left Jack's face as he spoke, his words tumbling out in a rush of hope and desperation. She nodded occasionally, her gaze flicking to the drawings spread before them. "And this one?" she asked, pointing to the sketch of the cabin. Jack paused, his brow furrowing. I'm not sure. I dream about that place sometimes." Miss Hartley's breath caught, but she quickly composed herself. "Your style, it's remarkably similar to an old friend of mine, an artist I knew years ago." A shadow fell across the booth when a man in his 30s, his clothes rumpled and hair unkempt, glared at Jack's drawings. "Aunt Evelyn, we should go. It's getting late." Miss Hartley waved him off. "In a moment, Richard. I'm talking with this young artist." Richard's scowl deepened as he looked at Jack. "Artist? He's just a kid scribbling for pocket money." Jack felt his cheeks burn, but Miss Hartley spoke before he could. "Richard, that's quite enough. Why don't you wait by the car?" As Richard slouched away, Miss Small, Hartley turned back to Jack. "I apologize for my nephew. He's struggling with his own artistic journey." She began selecting drawings, more than Jack had dared hope to sell. As she wrote out a check, she asked casually, "Tell me, Jack, where are your parents?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. They died when I was little. It's just me and Emily now." Miss Hartley's pen paused. She looked at Jack for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. "I see," she said softly. "Well, I think we have much more to discuss. Would you mind if I spoke with your foster parents?" As Miss Hartley walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just happened. He just wasn't sure what. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and hushed conversations that stopped when Jack entered the room. Emily's treatments continued, each day bringing a little more color back to her cheeks. Then came the morning when their social worker arrived, her face uncharacteristically bright. "I have some news," she announced. Jack's heart raced as she explained. Miss Hartley wanted to become their guardian. She had the means to care for Emily's medical needs and was willing to take them both. But Jack hesitated, hardly daring to hope. "We'd be together?" The social worker nodded, smiling. "That's non-negotiable for Miss Hartley. She insists on keeping you two together." That afternoon, as they packed their meager belongings, reality began to sink in. They were leaving, together, for a new life in Seattle. Their foster parents hovered awkwardly, clearly relieved, yet trying to show some semblance of care. "You be good now," their foster mother said, patting Emily's head. "And Jack, keep drawing. You've got a real gift there." Jack nodded, throat tight. Despite everything, this place had been their home for years. Leaving felt like jumping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. As they climbed into Miss Hartley's sleek car, Jack clutched his sketchbook to his chest. Emily pressed close to his side, her small hand finding his. "Are we really going to live in a big city?" Emily whispered, eyes wide. Jack squeezed her hand. "Looks like it, but we'll be okay as long as we're together, right?" Emily nodded solemnly. "Always together." As the car pulled away, Jack watched their old life recede in the rearview mirror. The future loomed ahead, as vast and unknown as a blank canvas. But for the first time in years, Jack felt a flicker of something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The city rose before them, a forest of glass and steel stretching to the sky. Jack pressed his nose against the car window, drinking in the sights of their new home. Beside him, Emily's eyes were wide, her hand still clasped tightly in his. Miss Hartley's house wasn't just a house. It was a monument to modern architecture, all clean lines and vast windows that seemed to bring the outside in. As they stepped through the front door, Jack felt as if he'd wandered onto the pages of one of his drawings, a world of possibility made real. "Leo," Miss Hartley called out, "come meet Jack and Emily." A boy about Jack's age appeared at the top of the stairs. His dark hair fell in messy waves, and his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. He regarded Jack and Emily warily. "Leo is my adopted son," Miss Hartley explained gently. "He's been with me for about a year now." Jack nodded, offering a tentative smile. Leo didn't return it. As Miss Hartley showed them around, Jack's attention was caught by a door left slightly ajar. Beyond it, he glimpsed easels, canvases, and the unmistakable smell of paint. "Ah," Miss Hartley said, noticing his interest. "That's the studio. Would you like to see it?" The studio was everything Jack had ever dreamed of and more. Brushes of every size lined the walls. Paints in colors he'd never even imagined filled the shelves. In the center stood a large easel, a half-finished painting resting on it. "It was my friend's," Miss Hartley said softly. "Leo's father. He passed away last year." Suddenly, Leo's red-rimmed eyes made sense. Jack turned to the boy, recognition of a shared loss passing between them. As they settled into their new rooms that night, Jack heard a commotion from downstairs. Peering over the banister, he saw Richard, Miss Hartley's nephew from the art fair, gesticulating wildly. "You can't be serious, Aunt Evelyn." Richard's voice carried up the stairs. "Taking in more strays when you should be focusing on my career." "That's quite enough, Richard." Miss Hartley's tone was steel wrapped in silk. "My decisions are not up for debate." As Richard stormed out, Jack retreated to his room, mind whirling. This new life, it seemed, came with its own set of challenges. The first weeks in Seattle passed in a blur of newness. Emily thrived in her new school, making friends with an ease that Jack envied. Her treatments continued, each doctor's visit bringing cautious optimism. For Jack, the adjustment wasn't as smooth. His art classes at the prestigious school Miss Hartley had enrolled him in were a far cry from Mrs. Thompson's encouraging smiles. Here, every brushstroke was critiqued, every composition questioned. Jack found himself second-guessing the very talent that had brought him here. Leo remained a silent, brooding presence in the house. He spent hours in the studio, emerging with paint-splattered clothes and a scowl that deepened whenever he saw Jack. One afternoon, Jack walked into the studio to find Leo glaring at one of Jack's sketches pinned to the wall. "You think you're so special?" Leo muttered, with your perfect little drawings and your sad orphan story. Jack felt his cheeks burn. I never said I was special. Leo snorted. You don't have to. Aunt Evelyn does it for you. Before Jack could respond, Emily burst into the room. Jack! Jack! Look what I did! She thrust a piece of paper at him, covered in wobbly lines that vaguely resembled the Seattle skyline. That's great, Em, Jack said, forcing a smile. Hey, why don't you tell me about that painting over there? The one with the boats? Emily's face lit up. She launched into a detailed description of the painting, down to the exact number of seagulls in the sky and the pattern on the fisherman's sweater. Leo's scowl faded, replaced by a look of bewilderment. How does she know all that? She only glanced at it for a second. Jack shrugged, a hint of pride in his voice. She remembers everything she sees, always has. For a moment, the tension in the room dissipated. Leo looked at Emily with something close to wonder, then back at Jack. But as quickly as it had come, the moment passed, and Leo's walls slammed back into place. That night, Jack heard Miss Hartley and Richard arguing again. Richard's voice carried up the stairs, full of resentment. Those kids are taking everything. My studio, your attention, my future. As Jack drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that he and Emily were caught in the middle of a storm they didn't fully understand. The announcement came on a drizzly Seattle morning, plastered on bulletin boards and whispered excitedly in art class hallways. The city was holding a youth art competition for a new park mural. The winning design would be painted larger than life, a permanent mark on the city's landscape. Miss Hartley's eyes gleamed as she read the flyer over breakfast. This is perfect, she declared. Jack, Leo, you should enter together. Leo's spoon clattered against his bowl. Together? With him? Jack stared at his toast, suddenly fascinated by the pattern of seeds on the crust. Yes, together. Miss Hartley's tone brooked no argument. Your styles could complement each other beautifully. Jack's detailed realism with Leo's abstract expressionism, it could be extraordinary. The boys eyed each other warily across the table. Emily, oblivious to the tension, chirped, Can I help too? Miss Hartley smiled. Of course, dear. Every artist needs a good assistant. That afternoon, Jack and Leo faced off in the studio, a blank canvas between them like a demilitarized zone. We could do a cityscape, Jack offered hesitantly. Leo scoffed. Boring. It should be something meaningful, not just pretty buildings. They bickered over themes and colors, each brushstroke a battle. By dinner, the canvas was a mess of competing ideas, neither boy willing to concede ground. As Jack washed his brushes, he felt a presence behind him. Richard leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips. Trouble in paradise? He asked, eyeing the chaotic canvas. Jack shrugged, uncomfortable. Richard's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. You know, if you really want to win, you should ditch Leo. He's talented, sure, but unstable. You'd be better off on your own. As Richard sauntered away, his words lingered in the air like the acrid smell of turpentine. Jack stared at the canvas, wondering if maybe, just maybe, Richard was right. The studio was bathed in moonlight when Jack crept downstairs, unable to sleep. To his surprise, a soft glow spilled from under the door. He pushed it open to find Leo perched on a stool, brush in hand, staring at their muddled canvas. Couldn't sleep either? Jack asked softly. Leo startled, then shrugged. This stupid mural. I can't get it out of my head. Jack moved to stand beside him, studying their conflicting brushstrokes in the dim light. Maybe we're trying too hard to make our styles fit, he mused. What if we let them clash on purpose? Leo's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Jack grabbed a fresh canvas, his pencil flying across the surface. Like this, your abstract shapes could be the backdrop, and my detailed figures could be emerging from them. As Jack sketched, Leo's eyes widened. He snatched up a brush, adding splashes of color to Jack's lines. For hours, they worked in tandem, ideas flowing freely for the first time. The sun was peeking over the horizon when Emily padded into the studio, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She gasped at the canvas, now alive with color and motion. It's like that painting we saw at the museum, she exclaimed, the one with the dancers coming out of the mist. Jack and Leo exchanged surprised glances. You remember that? Leo asked. Emily nodded enthusiastically, launching into a detailed description of the painting, down to the exact shade of blue in the dancer's skirt. Leo whistled low. That's incredible. Hey, Emily, what else do you remember from the museum? As Emily rattled off painting after painting, Jack and Leo furiously sketched, incorporating elements from masterpieces into their design. The mural evolved before their eyes, becoming a tapestry of artistic homages woven through with their own unique vision. As the last brushstroke dried, Jack and Leo stepped back, a newfound respect mirrored in their eyes. "We actually did it," Leo said, wonder in his voice. Jack nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Yeah, we did." In that moment, something shifted. The wall between them didn't crumble completely, but a door had opened. As they stumbled off to catch a few hours of sleep before breakfast, Jack felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with artistic pride. For the first time since arriving in Seattle, he felt like he might have found not just a house, but a home. The night before the submission deadline loomed like a storm cloud. Jack and Leo hunched over their masterpiece, adding final touches. The mural had become a vibrant fusion of their styles, with Emily's perfect recall of famous artworks woven throughout. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Leo's hands began to shake. His breathing quickened, eyes darting around the room. "I can't do this," he muttered, backing away from the canvas. "It's not good enough. We're going to fail." Jack reached out, trying to calm him. "Leo, it's okay. Look at what we've created." But Leo wasn't listening. In a sudden move, he swiped at the canvas, his arm knocking over a jar of paint. Dark blue splashed across their work, obscuring weeks of effort. "No." Jack lunged forward, but it was too late. A sizable portion of the mural was ruined. Leo stared at the damage, his face a mask of horror. Without a word, he fled the studio, leaving Jack alone with their dripping, devastated creation. As Jack tried desperately to salvage what he could, he heard a soft chuckle from the doorway. Richard stood there, eyes gleaming with barely concealed satisfaction. "Such a shame," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like Leo's demons got the better of him again. You know, Jack, true artists need to be able to handle pressure. Maybe this is a sign that you should work solo from now on." Jack said nothing, his throat tight with disappointment and a nagging suspicion that Richard's appearance wasn't entirely coincidental. As Richard sauntered away, Jack turned back to the ruined mural, determination setting his jaw. They had come too far to give up now. With Emily's help recalling every detail of their original design, Jack worked through the night. As dawn broke, he stepped back, exhausted but proud. The mural wasn't the same, but in some ways it was better, the struggle and resilience now an integral part of its story. The day after the mural incident, Leo was nowhere to be found. Miss Hartley's worry was palpable as she made call after call, trying to locate him. It was Emily who finally discovered his whereabouts. "I hear crying," she said, her ear pressed to the attic door, and breaking noises. Jack's heart sank. He knew what was up there, Leo's father's paintings, stored away since his death. "I'll go," Jack said quietly to Miss Hartley. She nodded, relief and fear warring in her eyes. The attic was a battlefield of shredded canvases and splintered frames. In the center of the destruction knelt Leo, a palette knife gripped in his trembling hand, poised to slash another painting. "Leo, stop!" Jack rushed forward, grasping Leo's wrist. "These are your dad's works. You'll regret this." Leo struggled against Jack's hold, tears streaming down his face. "What does it matter? He's gone, and I'll never be as good as him. I'll never be good enough." Jack held on, his voice softening. "That's not true, Leo. Look at what we created together. Your dad would be proud." Slowly, Leo's resistance faded. He collapsed into sobs, the palette knife clattering to the floor. Jack sat with him, shoulder to shoulder, among the wreckage of Leo's grief. As Leo's tears subsided, Emily's small voice came from the attic stairs. "I can help," she said. "I remember all of Uncle Leo's paintings. We can fix them." And so began an extraordinary healing session. Emily described each painting in incredible detail, every brushstroke, every subtle blend of color. Jack sketched as she spoke, while Leo mixed paints, his hands steadying with each passing minute. Hours melted away as they worked, recreating the destroyed artworks from Emily's flawless memory. With each painting reborn, some of the weight seemed to lift from Leo's shoulders. As they finished the last piece, Leo turned to Jack, his eyes red but clear. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for everything. The mural, sometimes it feels like too much." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know, but you're not alone, Leo. Not anymore. In that dusty attic, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, a true bond began to form between the three children. It was fragile, born of shared pain and tentative hope, but it was real. And for Jack, it felt like the first brushstroke on a brand new canvas. The morning after Leo's breakdown, Miss Hartley called Jack into her study. Her face was grave, hands clasped tightly on the desk before her. Jack's heart raced, fearing the worst about the mural competition or Leo's condition. Jack, Miss Hartley began, her voice gentle but firm, it's time I told you the truth about your parents. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jack gripped the arms of his chair, bracing himself. Miss Hartley's words came in a steady stream, filling in the blank spaces of Jack's past. His parents had been artists, brilliant, passionate, and deeply in love. They'd lived in that cabin from Jack's dreams, creating masterpieces that challenged the art world. The fire that took them, Miss Hartley continued, her voice catching, it wasn't an accident. Jack's breath hitched. What? There were people who felt threatened by your parents' talent, by the way they were changing the art scene. One night, someone set fire to their studio. The room spun as Jack's mind raced to process this information. But how did Emily and I survive? Miss Hartley's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Your father, he got you out, went back for Emily. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was too late for your parents, but you two, you were huddled together, protected by your father's body. Jack's vision blurred. Memories he didn't know he had surfacing. The heat, the smoke, his father's desperate voice telling him to run. The sketchbook, he whispered. Miss Hartley nodded. It was your mother's, the only thing that survived the fire. As the shock began to ebb, a new question formed. But why tell me now, after all this time? Miss Hartley took a deep breath. Because the person responsible for the fire, Jack, it was Richard's father. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Suddenly, Richard's resentment, his sabotage attempts, it all made a twisted kind of sense. Richard doesn't know, Miss Hartley added quickly. His father went to prison for other crimes, but I've always wondered if Richard inherited more than just artistic talent from him. As Jack sat there, reeling from these revelations, he felt a strange mix of grief and relief. The missing pieces of his past were finally falling into place, bringing with them a new understanding of his present and his future. The journey back to Montana was quiet, the rental car humming along empty highways. Jack sat in the back, Emily's head resting on his shoulder, while Miss Hartley drove. Leo had chosen to stay behind, understanding this was something Jack and Emily needed to do alone. As they neared their old hometown, Jack's heart pounded. The landscape grew familiar, rolling hills giving way to dense forests, and then, almost hidden among the trees, he saw it. The remnants of the cabin from his dreams. They parked at the end of the overgrown driveway. Jack helped Emily out of the car, holding her hand tightly as they approached the charred skeleton of their first home. The cabin's walls were mostly gone, but the stone fireplace still stood, a defiant monument to what once was. As they picked their way through the ruins, Emily's photographic memory proved invaluable. The easels were here, she said, pointing to a scorched corner. And Mom's favorite vase sat on that windowsill. Jack nodded, tears pricking his eyes as the space came alive in his mind. He could almost hear the laughter, smell the turpentine and oils. As they explored, Jack noticed something glinting beneath a fallen beam. Carefully, he lifted it away, revealing a metal box, blackened but intact. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside lay a collection of small canvases, miraculously preserved. Jack gasped as he recognized the style, the same flowing lines and vibrant colors that filled his own sketchbook. Mom's miniatures, he breathed. Emily peered at them, her brow furrowing in concentration. I remember these, she said softly. Dad would hide them around the house for Mom to find on her birthday. As they sifted through the box, Jack felt a profound connection to his parents. Their art, their love, their spirit, it all lived on through these small paintings, through his own artwork, through Emily's incredible memory. Miss Hartley watched from a respectful distance, her eyes misty. Your parents would be so proud of you both, she said. Jack nodded, unable to speak. He clutched the box of paintings to his chest, feeling for the first time that he truly understood where he came from and where he was meant to go. As they drove back to Seattle, the box of paintings secure in his lap, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past no longer loomed as a shadowy mystery. Instead, it was a foundation, a springboard propelling him toward a future bright with possibility. The idea struck Jack like a bolt of lightning as he watched Emily explain one of their parents' miniatures to Leo. Her eyes lit up as she described each brushstroke, each subtle blend of color, while Leo listened, enraptured. "We should start an art school," Jack blurted out. Leo's eyebrows shot up. "Us? But we're just kids." "Not just us," Jack explained, his excitement building, "but with Miss Hartley's help. A school for kids like us, kids who might not get the chance otherwise." The idea took root, growing rapidly as they discussed it over dinner that night. Miss Hartley listened intently, her eyes sparkling with interest. "It would be a place where art isn't just about technique," Jack continued, "but about healing, about finding your voice." Leo nodded enthusiastically. "We could use Dad's teaching methods, and Emily's memory could help with art history lessons." Miss Hartley smiled, a decision clearly forming in her mind. "I think it's a wonderful idea. In fact, I may have the perfect place for it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Miss Hartley led them to an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of Seattle. Its walls were crumbling, windows boarded up, but Jack could see the potential hidden beneath years of neglect. As they worked to renovate the space, scrubbing floors and patching walls, Jack felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. This wasn't just about art anymore. It was about creating a haven, a place where other kids could find the belonging he and Emily had found with Miss Hartley. But as their dream began to take shape, a familiar shadow loomed. Richard's visits became more frequent, his eyes narrowing as he took in the progress of the school. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing, threatening to undermine everything they'd worked for. The grand opening of the art school was just days away when disaster struck. Jack arrived at the building to find the front door ajar, a trail of destruction leading inside. Canvases were slashed, supplies scattered across the floor, and crude graffiti covered the freshly painted walls. His heart sinking, Jack called Miss Hartley. As they surveyed the damage, Emily tugged on Jack's sleeve. "I know who did this," she said quietly. "I saw him." Before Jack could respond, Richard's voice rang out behind them. "Quite a mess you have here," he said, feigning concern. "Maybe this is a sign you should leave the art world to the professionals." Miss Hartley's eyes flashed with a fury Jack had never seen before. "That's enough, Richard. We know it was you." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You can't prove anything, and even if you could, who'd believe you over me? I'm a respected artist, and you're just a bunch of orphans playing pretend." "We can prove it," Emily piped up. "I saw you. I remember exactly what you were wearing, what time you came, even the brand of spray paint you used." Richard paled, realizing the implications of Emily's perfect recall, but his moment of fear quickly gave way to bitter resentment. "So what? This school is a joke. You're all living in a fantasy world, thinking art can save you. It can't. It didn't save your parents, did it, Jack?" The room fell silent. Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What do you know about my parents?" Richard's laugh was hollow. "I know everything. How they were too idealistic, too naive, how they thought they could change the world with their art. Look where it got them." As Richard's tirade continued, Jack saw not just anger in his eyes, but pain, deep, unresolved pain. Suddenly he understood. "You're not mad at us," Jack said softly. "You're mad at your father, for what he did to my parents, for leaving you." Richard's words died in his throat. He stared at Jack, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Miss Hartley stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Richard, it's time to let go of this anger. It's eating you alive. Your father's actions are not your burden to bear." For a moment, Richard looked like he might lash out again, but then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he crumpled to the floor, sobs racking his body. As Miss Hartley comforted Richard, Jack surveyed the damaged art school. It would take work to repair, but as he caught Leo and Emily's determined gazes, he knew they were up to the challenge. This setback was just another part of their story, a reminder that art, like life, was about creating beauty from chaos. The morning of the art school's grand opening dawned bright and clear, as if the Seattle sky itself was celebrating with them. Jack stood before the refurbished building, hardly able to believe how far they'd come. The damage from Richard's outburst had been repaired, and in its place stood a testament to resilience and creativity. Colorful murals adorned the exterior walls, each one telling a piece of their story, from the Montana cabin to their new life in Seattle. As the first students began to arrive, Jack felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Emily greeted each one with a bright smile, her perfect memory already matching names to faces. Leo, once so withdrawn, now confidently led small groups on tours of the facilities. Miss Hartley beamed with pride as she cut the ribbon, officially opening the school. "Welcome," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "to a place where art heals, where creativity knows no bounds, and where every child has the chance to find their voice." Reporters from local news stations jostled for interviews, their cameras flashing. Jack caught snippets of conversation. Innovative program, inspiring story, second chances. As Jack guided a group of wide-eyed kids into the main studio, he noticed a familiar figure hanging back near the entrance. Richard stood awkwardly, a tentative smile on his face. Their eyes met, and Richard gave a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The day passed in a blur of activity, art lessons, speeches, and laughter filling the once-abandoned building with new life. As the sun began to set, Jack found himself back outside, and taking in the sight of their dream made real. Emily appeared at his side, her small hand slipping into his. "We did it, Jack," she said softly. "Mom and Dad would be proud." Jack squeezed her hand, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, Em, I think they would." As they stood there, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in brilliant hues, Jack felt a sense of completion. The art school wasn't just a building or a program, it was a new beginning for them and for every child who would walk through its doors. 6 months after the grand opening, the art school hosted its first student exhibition at Miss Hartley's gallery. The space buzzed with excitement as proud parents and community members admired the eclectic mix of artwork on display. At the center of it all hung a large collaborative piece, Jack and Leo's mural, finally completed and more stunning than either of them could have imagined. It told the story of their journey, from orphaned siblings to found family, each brushstroke a testament to their growth and healing. As Jack explained the piece to an enraptured group of visitors, he caught sight of Emily leading her own tour. Her photographic memory had made her an invaluable asset to the school, able to recall and describe countless artistic techniques and historical references. To Jack's surprise, he spotted Richard among the crowd, studying the students' artwork with genuine interest. When their eyes met, Richard offered a small smile and a nod of respect. As the evening wound down, Miss Hartley gathered everyone around for a final surprise. She unveiled a painting none of them had seen before, a stunningly detailed landscape of the Montana countryside, with a familiar cabin nestled among the trees. "Emily painted this," Miss Hartley announced, her voice filled with wonder. "From memory." The room fell silent as everyone took in the incredible detail of the piece. Jack stared at his sister in awe, realizing that her gift went far beyond just remembering. She had the power to bring memories to life. Emily blushed under the attention, but her eyes shone with pride. "I wanted to show where we came from," she said softly, "and how far we've come." As the applause filled the gallery, Jack felt a warmth spread through his chest. They had come full circle, transforming their pain into something beautiful and giving others the chance to do the same. In that moment, surrounded by art and family, both old and new, Jack knew that they had finally found their true home. 5 years had passed since the art school's first exhibition, and the world had shifted in ways Jack could never have imagined. He stood in the doorway of the school's main studio, watching as Leo guided a group of students through a particularly challenging lesson on perspective. Jack smiled, remembering their own struggles and triumphs. The tentative friendship that had formed in that moonlit studio session had blossomed into something deeper, a bond forged through shared pain and mutual understanding. Now, as co-directors of the school, they worked in perfect harmony, their contrasting styles complementing each other in ways that continued to surprise and delight their students. Emily, now a teenager, had become the school's resident art historian. Her incredible memory, coupled with a passion for research, made her classes a favorite among students and visiting artists alike. Jack watched with pride as she confidently led a tour group through the school's ever-growing gallery. Miss Hartley, though semi-retired, remained a guiding presence. Her decision to legally adopt Jack and Emily had been the final piece in their puzzle, cementing the sense of family they had built together. The sound of laughter drew Jack's attention to the yard, where a familiar figure was setting up an easel. Richard, his face softer now, free from the bitterness that had once consumed him, had found his own path. He visited often, teaching guest workshops and slowly, steadily rebuilding the bridges he had once tried to burn. As Jack walked through the school, he paused at a wall covered in photographs. Images of smiling students, successful exhibitions, and moments of pure artistic joy filled the space. At the center hung a single, weathered sketch, the cabin from his childhood, the first drawing he'd ever sold at that fateful art fair. Jack touched the frame gently, feeling the echoes of his past and the promise of the future. From orphaned siblings to a thriving family, from a dream born of desperation to a school that changed lives, they had come so far. And yet, Jack knew their greatest masterpiece was still unfolding, one brushstroke at a time.